So we're going to start by looking at imperialism in India, and we'll look at what India was like before imperialism and events that happened during imperialism, and then the effects of the imperialism. But this is kind of an image you can get of what imperialism is going to be like for India. It's a unique circumstance in that it's really just one European nation ruling over them as a protectorate and controlling a lot of the trade that's going in and out of India. Just a review, before that imperialism, we talked about how India was ruled by an Islamic empire, the Mughal Empire. And we talked about the reign of Akbar the Great, who had a lot of tolerance in India, tolerance towards Hindus, especially because he was Muslim. And then after Akbar, there was another Mughal leader who's going to really be the complete opposite. He reverses Akbar's policy of tolerance. He imposes Islamic supremacy over India. And he's going to allow French and English to increase their role in India as trading post empires. So this is kind of what leads to what is going to be the imperialism in India. South Asia felt the most immediate and strongest impact of European imperialism, especially by the British. So much of their economy is going to be controlled by England, and England even almost sets up a new government system in India. And we call this the British Raj. And that's the rule over South Asia between 1765 and 1947, first by the East India Company, a joint stock company, and then eventually by the British government. So you can see just how long that time period is that they're going to rule over India. And we see prior to imperialism, the East India Company had already been trading in India. They had a relationship with the Mughal Empire, and they considered India the brightest jewel of their crown because if you think of the products that they're getting from India, they're getting a lot of the tea and the textiles that were really, really significant in terms of trade, including cotton as well. Portugal had a stake in India for a bit, and they're going to lose that. And France also had a stake, and they're going to lose that. It's really going to be the British that are controlling India. So when we're looking at India, we have to also focus still on the Mughal Empire, which is really going to experience decline after Akbar falls, where there's two groups that are going to start controlling and gaining a bit more power in India. The Nawabs, which are Muslim princes more in the north, and Rajas, which are Hindu princes. So we're going to see certain members of nobility gaining a little bit more independence and power in India. And the British, the Dutch, and the French trading companies are going to set up ports in India with company men. They're going to send out company men to persuade Indian rulers to allow them to trade. And a lot of Indian rulers see some benefit to this because they can get riches, they can get contact with the West. And the East India Company is the one to become really, really involved in local affairs and politics. That's the British East India Company. They used a group of people, of soldiers called sepoys. Sepoys are European trained Indian private forces or soldiers used to protect forts and trade in India. So what they'll do is they'll train these sepoys and then they'll use them, even if the English are not there presently, they'll use these nobles, the Nawabs and the Rajas, and the sepoys that they train to protect their trade enclaves. And the further they become successful in controlling parts of India, they're going to move inland a little bit more and begin to influence other areas. The earlier trading posts in India were just coastal trading cities. And now we're going to see them moving inward a bit more. And this is going to really lead to the fall of the Mughal Empire and the rise of the East India Company. We're going to see almost complete British dominance. And we've been seeing it. We've been seeing their success in the 7 Years' War, where they gain major control of the Americas. And the East India Company forces, under a man named Robert Clive, are going to really weaken the French influence in India, and that's really when the English completely take over control. Um, Clive is also going to crush local authority and set the groundwork for the British Raj. When the last Mughal emperor was dethroned in 1858, the East India Company becomes the strongest European presence in India and was ready to fill that power vacuum that was left in terms of leadership in India itself. So we see the fall of an established empire in India leading to imperialism being more and more possible. By 1818, the East India Company, British East India Company, controlled an empire with more people than all of Western Europe, and they began to rebuild India on a British model that they thought would allow them to not only exert control, but to use India to their advantage in kind of becoming the most supreme and most powerful nation in the world. That's a part of nationalism. They're going to do three things. They're going to try to westernize India, Anglicanize, and modernize India. In terms of westernizing India, they want to create a more efficient system of government backed by military power. And the military is going to be composed of the sepoys, the Indians that they're going to train. They tried to replace India's complex landholding patterns, where they were very, very regional, with private property in order to collect more taxes on those properties. And they're going to give greater power to the regional princes, the Rajas, who rule nearly half of British India. They kind of have to use people in India to help them because the English are not going to send a bunch of settlers to India. They're going to use people who are already there that they feel like they can not necessarily take advantage of, but give rewards to for helping them. So they're going to use these Rajas, these Indian princes, to help almost serve as representatives to serve over India. And that's how they plan to westernize them. In terms of Anglicanize, that's almost like making them English. They're going to send missionaries to try to convert Indians to Christianity, which is not going to go over well because we already have two very prominent religions in India, Hinduism and Islam at this time, and a little bit of Buddhism even. They're going to try to reform the caste system. And it's interesting the way that they do it. They use the caste system to their advantage, and they have certain people in certain jobs based on a caste system that was already there. And then if you can think about it, where would they put themselves? They put themselves on top of the caste system. They're almost like this overarching power now over the caste system. The caste system. In terms of modernization, it wasn't all that negative for India. The British government's going to invest millions of dollars in building harbors and advancing cities and building irrigation canals to make their economics more profitable. But in the end, it's going to benefit India a little bit. And one of the key aspects that they're going to do, and this is incredibly well known, a well-known fact about world history, is the English are going to promote the building of railroads and rail networks throughout India. So they're going to be responsible for building India's first national transportation system. By 1870, India had the fifth largest rail network in the world. And that rail network is going to help to connect all the different regions in India. They're going to transport raw goods from the interior to the coast and vice versa, and from north to south and east to west. They're going to create a public works system. They're going to introduce India to the telegraph for better communication. And they're going to create more of an English culture for the elite, which increases westernized education and literature. So in terms of good effects for economics, the British rule over India creates a lot of new jobs as a result of trade. Not all of it was good because some of it was more of a coerced form of labor. They expanded their cash crop production. And the bad effects: loss of many jobs in local textile industries due to competition from cheap cotton goods from Britain. So basically, India's pre existing economy is going to collapse a bit because the British come in and almost just completely take it over. And we're going to see them change from more of a textile based trading zone to a raw cotton export, that's going to be then sent to Britain. And we see a famine due to the emphasis on cash crops. Without that pre-existing government, we're going to see a breakdown of their economic system. And restrictions are placed on non-British goods and production. This is kind of what the British did in the Americas as well. They said, if you want to buy a certain good, it has to be British made. It can't be French. It can't be Asian. It has to be an English made product or British made product. And they do this in order to maximize their economic benefits of imperialism. That's almost like mercantilism. Women, people of lower castes, and the untouchables and the poor were taxed really, really heavily under the British Empire. And so there we're going to see those social groups suffering a lot. And that's where we also see the British using the caste system that was already there. We do see a few benefits for women. We're gonna see the prohibition of sati, which is like burning yourself when your husband passes away. So we're gonna see that being prohibited. And then they're gonna start to encourage girls to be educated. But again, they're gonna be educated in more of a westernized education. So if you were to go to India, you wouldn't see too much of this, but you would see some British influence in India in terms of buildings and a couple churches and just like that English Tudor style of house. You would see that. And you can see here, it's interesting to note, this would be, if you're looking at this one, this would be like an English officer. This would be more of an elite Indian who he is working with in a business deal. And then this would be someone of a lower caste who would be serving both of them. So you actually see the English intermingling a lot with the more elite class of Indians, but then you see them exploiting the Indians who were lower in the caste system. So this is a source by British Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army. And this is what he says about imperialism in India. It is this consciousness of the inherent superiority of the European which had won for us India. However well educated and clever a native may be, and however brave he may have proved himself, I believe that no rank we can bestow on him would cause him to be considered an equal of the British officer. I want you to just take a minute to try to summarize this quote and analyze the point of view or purpose as if you were writing a DBQ on this topic. Then I want you to look at this photo, and I want you to imagine this photo also in a DBQ, document-based question. And I want you to look at this athletics team right here, where you see a mixture between English men and Indian men. And I want you to take note of what you see here and what might be happening, what types of people might be in this image. Finally, if you look at this one, this is how you would see the caste system being used. This is not even necessarily a British official. This would be an Indian elite who was working with the British. And I want you to take note of the the treatment of the lower classes in the caste system here, almost serving the elites in India. So the English almost make the caste system worse because when they give favors to the upper class Indians, it's going to make the lower class Indians become treated even worse than they had been in India in certain times. We're going to see some changes, some shifts and some rebellions against British rule, specifically within the group of soldiers that they train. So we see growing tensions between the sepoys, the trained military, and the East India Company. The sepoys are made up of mixed Indian groups who often resented each other. And the British forced sepoys to serve overseas in other colonies, and Hindu soldiers objected this since their religion forbade ocean travel often. And then we're going to see a mutiny break out, and you'll see why and you'll understand why. There's already tensions between the East India Company and the sepoys, the soldiers. The final insult was the introduction of a rifle that the British introduced. And they gave them these rifles with cartridges that they greased first with beef or pork fat, which is offensive to Hindus and Muslims. And in order to fire your weapon and to use your cartridge, you had to bite off this piece that was covered in grease with beef or pork fat. And they felt that they were being forced to convert to Christianity and that their religion was being imposed upon. So by March 1858, the sepoys are going to lead a rebellion against the British and try to fight and bring down their control. But I'm so sorry, I'm so sick. But the East India Company forces are going to stop that rebellion. And we don't see too much come out of it. We just see high losses for both the British and the sepoys. And all it does is it really leads to a final collapse of the Mughals, because the East India Company is now going to take more and more control of India after this to stop further rebellion. Following the Sepoy Rebellion, the East India Company was seen as not being strong enough ruling over India. So the British government decided to take it into their own hands. And around 1858, the East India Company had to kind of relinquish their control over India to the British government. This is when we see India becoming a complete British protectorate. They could not unite against the British. Many opposed Mughal rule and divisions between Muslims and Hindus. And when the British Crown took over India, they decided to break it into 11 provinces. They created 2 new trading posts. They had someone serving in India, an English official, the Secretary of State for India, who would serve in London, but they would look over what was going on in India. They sent over a governor general in India who would go and live there in Delhi. And they set up a system called the Indian Civil Service, a really, really powerful and efficient bureaucracy made up of British people some who lived in India, who ran the British Raj. Eventually, they added educated, qualified, and elite Indians in this civil service. After that Sepoy rebellion failed and England took total control of India, Indian leaders argued that the only way for Indians to regain control of their country was to ignore all the divisions that existed in India and try to work together for Indian nationalism. Christian missionaries had created large education systems, and we see a growing number of Indians being educated and a middle class being educated. They're going to use all of these things that they learned to try to build Indian nationalism. They resented living in a country where, they were citizens of this country first, and now they feel like second-class citizens to the British. So 2 major nationalist groups are founded, and we'll talk more about this in time period 6. One of them was called the Indian National Congress. They believed in peaceful protests, calling for more democracy. This is more of like the one that Gandhi would be in charge of. And then we see a Muslim League built in 1906. They're going to be a little bit more aggressive with getting India and control of India back. By the early 1900s, both began calling for self-government for India. They wanted the British gone, but we are not going to see that happen until Time period 6.